In 2019, I woke up in the middle of night out of nowhere, but I couldn't move and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak, and I was hearing very, very strange noises on the other side of my wall. I played it off as sleep paralysis because after a while, the noises stopped and I could move again. I can only describe the noises as wailing from maybe a woman or a child. I really thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then my mum's door opened, whose room was right next to mine. And she checked up on our dog, who was sleeping in the hall. Our dog shook himself awake, and this also made me try to hold on to the thought that I was the only one that heard this noise. Because my dog barks at every single thing, and yet he slept through the crying. I was restless for a while until I was able to go back to bed. The next morning, my mum's boyfriend at the time left for work, and my mum was driving me to school when she told me that she and her boyfriend heard weird crying sounds in the living room. I told her that I'd heard the same thing, but that I did not get up to see what it could have been, because I thought it was just sleep paralysis. This happened again 2 more nights before it completely stopped, and I still don't understand what could have caused this sound. A weird thing that happened days after the noises stopped was that my mom was alerted that someone she knew had passed, and after the news was shared with her, we never heard those specific noises again. In January of 2012, my aunt passed away unexpectedly. Her sister-in-law lived in the apartment next door, and that night, my cousin and I were sleeping over. We were woken up by my uncle banging on the door to tell us about the news. After my aunt passed, they quickly began the process of moving out. But one day, my cousin asked if I could go inside with her to wait while she got something from her room. I said yes, and we went inside, and she went through the living room and down the hall to her room. I waited by the door and looked around the empty space that was in the living room, and out of nowhere, I heard my aunt's bedroom door open then close, her footsteps, the bathroom door opening, and then the bathroom door shutting. I stood there completely stunned and waited silently for my cousin to come back to me. When she came back out the living room, I quickly told her what happened, and she believed me, but she said she hadn't heard it. We left the apartment and I never went in there again, but I also never felt my aunt's presence afterwards either. During that time, I had lost another aunt to cancer 2 months before this, and she also lived in the same apartment complex, and so I spent a lot of time in between those 3 homes, in those 3 apartments, and I know for certain that those footprints were my aunt. I had those sounds memorized. I hope she's okay, and I wasn't scared, but I sure miss her. Between 2016 to 2019, there was tons of activity in my home, and during this time, my mum had a boyfriend who lived with us. My room used to have Christmas lights up in the earlier years, when I was 15 and 16. My mum had a rule that I had to sleep with the door open, so I wouldn't stay up at night on my phone without her catching me. I would wake up between 5:30 and 6 to get ready for school, and be out the door by 7. Usually, my mum's boyfriend would be long gone by then, but one day I woke up just in time to see him pass by the hall. He's about 6'1", 6'2", and nothing seemed unusual about it, except he had a dark mass following behind him, that I could see as a shadow against the wall, which was weird, because his actual shadow was on the floor in front of him as he passed. I remember feeling pure dread, and so I closed my eyes and tried not to think about it anymore. I never saw that shadow again, but that wasn't the only shadow person I had in my home. I usually would unplug my lights when it was time to go to school to save energy, but sometimes I'd forget. Once I came home after school, and during dinner, my mom's boyfriend says something along the lines of, "Oh, I saw you sitting on your bed this morning. You must have gotten to school really late, huh?" And I looked at him in confusion and I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he looked at me a bit stunned. He asked me what time I had left, and I said 7 a.m. like always. And he looked scared and told me that at around 7:20 a.m, he was rushing past my room because he was running late, and he saw a figure sitting on the edge of the bed and assumed it was me since my lights were still on, and left the house. That definitely freaked me out, and I couldn't sleep comfortably in my room after that for weeks. I work a very early morning schedule at my job. I go in at 2 in the morning and work until noon 4 days a week. I used to sleep in until about 7 o'clock on my days off because of how exhausting my schedule is, but recently found it easier to just wake up at my normal time at 1 o'clock in the morning every day of the week. It's not easy, but I get paid good money at my job, and waking up at the same time every day assures that I won't be exhausted all the time trying to balance my schedule out every week. I'm very disciplined about my health and well-being, so I've always been a runner. I always try to run about 15 to 20 miles every week. I've always preferred running outdoors rather than on a treadmill in some gym somewhere, but where I live, it can get a bit hot outside, so I've always ran early in the morning or late at night. Ever since getting my job, I've gone for my runs at 2 o'clock in the morning on my days off. I actually find it very relaxing, and I love the emptiness of the streets at night. The atmosphere provokes a lot of deep thoughts within me, which always makes my runs easier. Now, I'm a very tall and muscular man, so I've never been too terrified of running into some creep at night on my runs. I also used to take karate when I was in high school, so I always feel as if I can defend myself if a situation of sorts ever presents itself. Basically, if someone ever tried to get tough with me, I'd be more scared for them than I would myself. However, my self-confidence and courage recently disappeared after encountering whatever that thing was on one of my runs. A couple of months ago, I was on my running the same way I always run. I was about 2 miles into a 5-mile run, meaning I was 2 miles away from home. I always run on the outskirts of the giant park that borders the north side of my town. It's filled with trees and bushes and a lot of animals, so it isn't uncommon to have some encounters with badgers or possums or birds at night, and I've grown used to all the weird noises I would hear coming from the trees. However, this night was different. I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary while running along the path next to the park, but I got this deep, dreadful feeling in my stomach. I'd never felt anything like it before. Fear arose within me, and I had no idea why. My sixth sense kicked in that night. I didn't know what I was feeling or even thinking. I just knew I had to get out of there as fast as I could. My jog turned into a run, which then turned into a sprint. My senses knew I was being followed by someone or something. I felt the leaves crumbling at my feet with each step I took. I didn't even think about where I was running or where I was heading, as long as I got out of there. I wanted to look behind me just to know if I was actually running from something or if I was just being paranoid, but my body wouldn't let me look. The dread and fear only began to grow within me. Even after running for a good couple of minutes, I still didn't feel safe. Suddenly, I found myself trying to shout and yell for help, but I couldn't. I couldn't make a sound. I was hardly even breathing. My vocals were drowning in my despair. I was about out of breath at this point, so I made the mistake of turning around in hopes to find myself alone with no one chasing me. As I turned around, my foot kicked into a rock sticking out of the ground, and I fell to my face. In fear, I looked behind me. I stood up and prepared myself for whatever came my way. My flight reactions were about to turn into fight reactions. I clenched my fists and stand up straight, making myself appear as threatening as I could be. Surprisingly, I found myself alone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Nothing. Why would I be so afraid of nothing? What was I running from? Was I that paranoid? I had a hard time believing this was all my imagination, but that's what my eyes were saying, because no one was there. Nothing was there. I felt relief, and I began to slow walk home to try and catch my breath. I was farther from home now than I was before, and the only way back from home where I was back on that path next to the park where I just came from. I decided this time to walk directly through the park to avoid the same path I was just on. I soon regretted this decision, however. I had never walked through the park at night before, so I had no idea that there were no lights on the paths. It was pitch black, the darkest black I'd ever seen all around. I couldn't turn back now, though. I had to get back home. I wanted to put all of this behind me. I kept putting one foot in front of the other and only looked forward. As long as I felt the pavement below me, I knew I was going in the right direction. Suddenly, I felt my stomach drop yet again. The same feeling and the same fear grew within me. This wasn't the exact same, though. I knew I was in real danger, and it wasn't just paranoia this time, because this time I saw something. I saw something in this pitch darkness, the darkest black I've ever seen. The deepest, darkest thing I'd ever seen in my life was moving toward me, on the path I was walking on. This time, I didn't fight. I didn't run. I froze, dead in my tracks. I couldn't make myself move. I tried, but I was paralyzed. I had to watch the darkness of whatever this was approaching me. The dark black of this being grew closer and closer until everything was darker than black around me. I felt immersed into the darkness. I opened my mouth to make a sound, and this time I actually could. I let out a fearful cry and closed my eyes and felt nothing. I can't explain this feeling, but I felt nothing. I honestly thought I was dead, but the sounds of birds chirping slowly faded in. Too afraid to open my eyes, I continued to listen to the chirping of birds, and in the distance, I could even hear the voices of people. I felt a soft breeze touch my nose, and I finally worked up the courage to open my eyes. It was daytime, and the morning dew covered me. I was laying in the park, on the path right where I was attacked. But how could it be morning already? A few seconds ago, I was just in the darkness of these woods, and now it was daylight. I felt exhausted and confused, and I headed for home without question. I'm still confused about this experience to this day. I've never slept walk in my life that I know of, or have had any other occurrences like this ever since. I still can't explain what happened to me, but it's safe to say that I don't run at 2 o'clock in the morning anymore. So when I was a kid, we came home from school early due to a town-wide power outage. So it comes around dinner and the power still doesn't come back on. I need to set the scene for this part. So the way the house was laid out is you would come into the main floor and a few feet in front of you, there were stairs going downstairs where my room, the bathroom, the living room and a door to the basement would be. With that said, my family was going to go out to eat. Everyone went to the car but me. I stayed inside to go to the bathroom. I'm going to the bathroom and all of a sudden I hear a door open, then slam shut. Stomps across the floor, then a door open and slams shut again. And it sounded like it was on my level. I go out to the car and ask my parents if they were in the house. And they say not everyone has been out in the car waiting for me. Fast forward about 6 or 7 years. I'm at the house and I go to the basement to grab something. I swear to this day, I could have sworn my dog came downstairs to the basement with me. So I go upstairs and turn off the lights and look down the stairs into the basement with a light on behind me, and I see a pair of green eyes looking at me. I tell my dog to come up like 2 or 3 times and he doesn't. So I close the door and figure, okay, he'll bark at the door for me to let him up in a second. But no, he won't. I go up to the main floor and he's lying there on the couch, sound asleep. Fast forward another 3 years. My youngest brother is 3. When my mum would tuck him in, he would ask my mum if he would tuck in the girls, and my mum would be confused, and there's only my sister, and she's 18. He would say no, they're little girls, and they want to be tucked in too, and this would freak out my mum. This happened a few years ago, but I remember everything clearly, and every time I think or talk about it, the feeling comes back. When I was 8, my mum and stepdad moved us to a country home. I have 2 younger siblings as well, so there were 5 of us who lived there. The house was always a little creepy, but it held so much more than just a creepy feeling. I've been able to see things from a very young age. I don't talk about it much, because honestly, you always get mixed feelings, so I avoid it. Anyway, when we first moved in, I kept seeing a little boy. He was always in my little brother's room or the kitchen, and he cried, all of the time. I was 8, so I didn't really know why, but I always tried to ask what was wrong, and he didn't talk back. I kept telling my mom that a little boy in the kitchen kept waking me up at night, but she never believed me. For a few years, it was just a little boy, but that all changed very, very quickly. Right before my mom and stepdad divorced, they fought all of the time. The environment in the house definitely felt hostile, and then he moved out, and things went downhill fast. At first, It was just a few extras I'd see at night, usually roaming our L-shaped hallway. Then, weird things started happening. I've never been a great sleeper, so I'd always be awake at night. I'd watch my door open and close by itself. I'd hear banging all throughout the hallway, and when I had to go do laundry in the back room that also housed the entrance to the basement, I'd instantly get a heavy feeling. I went down one time. I got to the second step up from the bottom and took a look around. I saw people chained to the walls staring at me. I literally ran so fast. I cried and tried to tell my mom, but she told me I was lying. I wasn't. She started believing after she had her scary encounter, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share that here. But if I can, I'd be more than happy. Anyways, things kept progressing. We couldn't keep a light bulb in the light in the dining room, because as soon as we changed it, the bulb would literally explode, leaving shards of glass all over the floor. I watched the kitchen chair fly across the room, slamming so hard against the wall, it left a hole there. We had a lamp in the living room that fell over every single night at the same time. Towards the end of our time there, we slept in the living room with the fireplace on because my mom couldn't afford propane. We had a blanket over the doorway, and when it was open, because someone went to the bathroom, I'd see a lady in white on the dining room floor. She said one sentence, and I'll never forget it. "He's coming." She'd repeat it until she disappeared. My theory is that she was giving us a warning about the demon that paid us a visit every night. He was evil. He was definitely set on making us leaving or hurting us. He made his presence well known. Tormenting us was his favourite. We always went down the long hallways in pairs after things started getting bad. The one time I didn't take someone, I ended up with scratch marks. Nothing followed us when we moved though, which is amazing, but I'm very thankful for it. Only one person has lived in that house since we left years ago. He lasted 6 months before he called it quits. It stands empty now at the end of the long driveway. I've been back once. It wasn't a pleasant experience. The house is starting to cave in. I'm sure the farmer will tear it down and connect all his fields finally. My friends Sparks and Frosty have a creepy basement. It's finished and nice, but when you go down there, the energy is very off. We hang out in the basement every time the crew is together. We usually just ignore the energy and continue about our day. One day I went up to use the bathroom, and my friends Spark and Frosty decided to pull a joke on me. They snuck upstairs and went out to the backyard, where a shed is, and they hid in it. They didn't set up anything in the basement. They just hid from me to scare me. I returned to the basement to hear giggling from the storage closet. It sounded just like them. I called them out and I heard, "Hush, shh, she's right there." I called out to them again, and it wasn't funny when I could hear them. I swung open the door to find nobody. What the hell? There was nothing. No phones playing a recording or something set up to prank me. Absolutely nothing. I felt the colour drain from my face. I ran upstairs in a panic and saw them opening the shed. I told them everything and they looked confused. But we were out here the entire time. They showed me they had their phones with them and weren't messing with me. Every time I'm alone in their basement, I hear that same giggling coming from the closet. Nobody else hears it. For a bit of context about me, I live near Atlanta, am married, and truthfully live a pretty boring life. I'm a former Navy, former law enforcement, and currently have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. I'm also a huge gamer and PC nerd. I haven't been religious since I was about 8, and when people ask what I believe, I simply reply, I believe in science, and leave it at that. There is another side of me that listens to Alan Watts' Chill Step at night, and ponder the deeper questions of reality and our universe. But in most day-to-day situations, I'm very logical, and usually try to debunk things first. But when logic and science cannot explain some things that happen, that's when you really start to question everything. One of my earliest core memories I have from about 4 years old, in 1990, was the ghost I saw in my grandparents' house in Florida. I remember my mom sitting on the couch in the living room, talking with both of them, And so I ran off through the house to explore instead of listening to the grown-ups talk. There was a dividing wall that separated the living room, where they were from, and another room, my grandparents called the den, that was used for other social visits when they hosted guests. I was in the back hallway of the house, peeking into the den around the doorframe from the hallway. As I'm peeking around the doorframe into the den, it's a long rectangular shaped room with just blank white on the left wall and a row of curtained windows on the right. Mind you, this is broad daylight on a sunny spring day, so there was a lot of bright ambient light coming in from the windows. And I'll never forget what I saw until the day I die. This old wrinkly lady in a Victorian style dress floating in midair in the middle of the room. She was maybe 10 or 15 feet from me, floating about a foot off the ground looking at the wall. Her dress was blue, with the frizzy lace around the wrists and neck area being white. She had silver grey hair pulled back into a bun behind her head. She was also translucent, so I could see her, but I couldn't also see through her. I also could not see her feet, just the bottom of her dress as it waved slightly in a very ethereal way, about a foot off the ground. She turned her head to the left and looked directly at me, then turned her head back to the front, then looked upward and kind of evaporated upwards towards the ceiling and disappeared. That is the clearest memory that I have in my entire brain, even more so than other core memories from that young age range. It was crystal clear in my mind's eye. We found out later that my grandfather had originally bought the house from an old man whose wife had died in the house. And he was too old to keep up the land anymore. So we think maybe I saw her. We're not really sure. We also realised later on that if not for that left wall being there, she would have been looking directly at the back of my mum's head. Like if not for that wall being there, she was actually watching the three of them talk, if that makes sense. Kind of creepy. I have actually had many other unexplainable experiences in my life. From living in a haunted apartment, literally 10 feet away from a graveyard, to having all kinds of crazy shit about in our current house after we had my 20-year-old cat put to sleep. I also have other stories from family members and co-workers, including one where my mum and stepdad both saw my dead cousin at the same time. So 4 of my friends are rooming in a student housing apartment, and they've been experiencing weird occurrences since they moved in, with a mannequin named Tiffany. We're pretty sure Tiffany is from a Sears at a mall, but not quite sure. They lived in the same place last year without Tiffany, and nothing weird happened. So far this year, they've had varying experiences that make no sense whatsoever. Here's what's happened so far. A door shutting on its own, with no windows open and all roommates accounted for, with the roommate living in that room gone. One person's LED lights changed colours on their own, and no one else had the remote. A different door shaking like someone was trying to get in when the lights were turned off. The one in the room turned the lights on and the door stopped shaking. Then he turned them off and it started again. The temperature is always 67 degrees, even if someone changes the thermostat to 75 degrees the night before. We put Tiffany in the centre of the room, facing the front door with LED strobe lights on. 3 of us outside in the hallway looking at her and 1 person in the kitchen. While the 3 of us were out in the hall, the one in the kitchen started yelling to stop. We turned the strobe lights off and turned on the kitchen lights. The one who yelled says his back got scratched. So we checked to see if he was just messing with us, only to find 4 scratch marks across his back. We're all very confused and shaken by these occurrences. We don't know how to explain it, other than something paranormal. If anyone has any opinions or suggestions, we're all very curious. I should start this by saying I'm a believer in the paranormal, always have been, but fully understand why people would be skeptics. I've had paranormal experiences all my life. I lived in a house with ghosts from being born. I used to have night terrors so bad, my mum would call 111. We saw so many things in the house.
Most, I believe, was residual. Everyone knew the house was haunted. My mum had priests come out to bless the house, but no one acknowledged or admitted it was haunted till we moved out when I was 11. I walked in to view the next house and remember saying to my mum, "Mum, there's nothing here. It's empty." I was talking about the feeling. I knew it wasn't haunted. The real estate guy thought I was nuts, mind you, but I was right. Not a single person ever experienced anything there. Next we moved to a dorm or bungalow. I instantly knew it wasn't right. There was so much heaviness in the air. We moved anyway. And again, I was right. Everyone experienced paranormal things. Noises, things being moved, tapping that would move, and a girl. She would be seen at the top of the stairs or walking across near the front door. We lived here for around 6 years before things got better and moved out. The next house is the current house. Definitely something here. Something nice. It makes its presence known every now and then, but it's fine. I honestly believe, scrap that, I know my grandpa is here. He passed in the second house and he's always been with me, but it has been more obvious since my granny moved in. There's many occasions as to why I know he's here, but I won't go into that now, as it'd be too long. I should also state I'm 24, and this shit has been happening a while. My boyfriend didn't believe in ghosts and we had been together for a bit, and then he had an experience that made him a firm believer. Probably the scariest one in the house. My main question is, do you think people who experience the paranormal as a baby or young child are more susceptible for life? My mum did get told by a psychiatrist when I was younger that I had a gift. How true that is, who's to know? I've never really looked into the probability of it. Just what's happened to me has happened, and I'm happy for the experiences in a way. Let me know what you guys think. For those of you that are 90s babies, you may remember the huge Furby boom, and the just as popular but slightly less known in my area, Poochie. This was a robotic dog that sang little tunes when you pushed the right button on the head, or placed its bone by his nose to activate him. So this was back when Harry Potter first came out, and my mum used to read a chapter a night to me. One of those nights, around 8 p.m, we suddenly hear one of the tunes coming from my room. Weird, but I had that toy for a bit. Maybe it was faulty wiring. After a few nights of it activating on its own at around the same time, it stopped working when I intentionally tried to play with it. About a week more of this goes by, and I get irritated and take out the batteries. Silence for around 2 weeks. And then, one night at around 10 p.m, the sing-song tune begins once more. No batteries, no prompt from me. I began to feel afraid and weird about it. This led me to throwing it hard against a wall, popping its head slightly out and breaking a leg. I thought that was that. I loved it too much to get rid of it, but didn't want it turning on anyone. Except, that wasn't it. It continued to turn on every night at around the same time. I took to burying it at the bottom of my toy box, under plushies to quiet the noise, but every morning it would reappear on my shelf. I was afraid. I was so scared I decided to throw it out. I threw it out 5 times, and it kept appearing back in my room, with both the maid and my parents denying having taken it out of the trash to put back in my room. One day, without me really noticing when it happened, it disappeared, and I never saw it again. So for a bit of background, I grew up in a town 30 minutes outside of Cancun, Mexico. Shopping had to be done in the city, so I had a babysitter often. The house had a long, narrow corridor from the front yard to the backyard, along the side of the house where the kitchen and living room were. Now that we have the setting, my mom had left to go grocery shopping, leaving me in the hands of a teenage girl from our area. Now, I admit, I was a kid. Time perception is way off for kids. But I do remember my mom hadn't been gone for long when I terrorised this girl enough that she decided to leave me alone and go home. I was very satisfied with myself. At first. What didn't feel like too much time later, while I'm in my room, I hear a whispering voice. Assuming it was the babysitter back, thinking she had scared me by leaving, I went to try to run her off again. Yes, I was a huge asshole kid. But as I walk towards the living room, I see a shadow by the window where the corridor was. My blood turned cold. I remember terror. I remember fear greater than I ever had before. And suddenly, the voice became 2 voices, then 3, and the shadows multiplied. They were tall, solid, black, and human-shaped. And as the shadows began to get more solid-looking, the voices also became louder. They were saying words such as kill, alone, and murder. In my terror, I called my best friend's mom, the only number aside from our own that I had memorized. I told her I was scared. Someone was there at the house. She rushed over to pick me up and arrived at the same time my mom did. Now to me, it felt like no more than an hour, 2 max, had gone by. But consider the 30-minute drive each way, plus my mom usually took 2 or 3 hours hitting the 3 major stores for shopping day. The time doesn't add up. But those shadows, those solid black scary shadows, dissipated as soon as my mom showed up. It was around the year 2011. My parents had moved back to the US and I hated my first rental house. So my then boyfriend and I decided to look for other places, closer to the main city. A friend we had in common, and also the reason he and I even met, told us she had a house for rent and that we could rent it for very cheap. Now, despite all my past weird and unexplainable experiences, I was still very much a skeptic. Paranormal? Bah. We knew she and her family very much believed in and prayed to their saint La Santa Muerte. To not make this an even longer story than it already will be, I recommend looking her up on Google if you don't know who she is. Suffice to say, she's often venerated by those wishing for money and harm to their enemies. On to my story with her. A little description of the house. As you walk in the front door, on the left is a living room. Straight ahead is a corridor that holds the kitchen and a back door to the closed-in and mostly roofed yard. If you stand at the front door and look down the corridor, you can see through a window at the end of the kitchen into a small laundry room that's attached. The main bedroom was upstairs, and a guest bedroom next to the corridor, and below the upstairs bathroom. Now, the scene is set. The heavy curtains were always drawn. No one was in that house, but we always felt watched. We lived there for around 2 months when things started getting very weird. My pets began acting odd. My parrot died and within hours was into heavy decomp. My 10-year-old dog with cataracts and minor hip dysplasia acted like she could see and had no pain in her joints, but she wouldn't stand in the sunlight. And so, my first weird moment was getting home from work every day, feeling like I was going to find another pet dead. I got home feeling something was off and quietly walked to the back door to peek my head out. Molly, the old dog, was laying unmoving by the door. No breath, no anything. I watched her for a few minutes, and eventually, when I decided it was time to move her, as she was clearly dead, I made a noise and watched as her chest area instantly expanded, and she began to breathe. A few days later, while I was at work, my boyfriend called me to tell me that dogs got in a fight. Junior had blood all over his neck from where Molly tore through him. He needed to go, so please hurry home. When I got there to check on them, sure enough, Junior had blood all over his neck, without a single wound. Molly had no blood, but 2 deep punctures, one above the eye and one below her jaw. That night, my husband and I sat down to talk. Something was weird. We would see a white veil and face watch us through the laundry room. Pieces and corners of the tiled floor would go missing without a trace. In the guest bedroom, water would drip onto your shoulders or head, but no one ever reached the floor. I told him I was afraid to feed my own pets. We agreed he would take care of them for a bit. Only a few days later, on my way back upstairs from the kitchen, something strong tried to push me down them. I managed to get upstairs and told him what happened. Remember, even at this point, we were both still non-believers. A day later, as we're laying in bed, he asks me if I had noticed the ledge in the backyard area, with the picture frame and candles. I informed him there was a frame laid down and 2 candles also on the sides, but hadn't thought much of it. He said the frame was standing at the centre, with both candles positioned on each side upright. I asked him what was in the picture, and his words were not even fully out of his mouth. I sent them when the dirty clothes basket, which had a click on top and a heavy pair of wet jeans laid over it, dry scared me onto believing. The top lifted up a few feet into the air and flew sideways into the wall. I knew in that instant we needed to leave, now. So we prepared our things and went to stay with his sister. Turns out, the reason our friends refused to visit was every time they walked in, they felt something really off about the place, but hadn't wanted to tell us. The owner was very upset learning we were leaving only 5 months into our contract. She said she had forgotten that portrait and the candles, and she felt ignored and abandoned. She only wanted us to leave her flowers and money as tribute. We noped right out of there. My ex went back to pack up, fell asleep on the bed, and was slapped awake by nothing there. After we moved, only a week after the dogfight, suddenly Molly's wounds were scars. She was back to being her normal, old, not good sight or mobility self. And I'll never not believe in the paranormal again. After we finally got a new house rented, my boyfriend went back to his nightly gym routine. From his first night, around 7 o'clock at night, I noticed these flying ants, for lack of a better description, roughly a ½ inch long, all over the house, a ridiculous amount. Naturally, I got up to investigate where they were coming from. I noticed they were coming in from the window unit in the living room wall. I turned it off, killed all the ones I could, and realised at around 8 PM, they were gone. What I didn't realise until 9ish is that the dead ones were gone too. Disappeared. Into thin air. The next night, again around 7, I heard a loud rattling noise coming from the living room. I jumped up, worried one of the animals had messed with something, to see the metal chain on the ceiling fan swinging hard against the light dome, causing the rattling and clunking noise. As soon as I walk into the room, I see ants shooting out of the AC once more. Again, I kill as many as possible. Again, by around 8 PM, they disappear. We used to have the boyfriend's niece and nephew stay with us a lot, at least every weekend. The ants and clanging chain lasted about a week and suddenly stopped. Now, we took the AC apart and never found a nest or anything. So where they had come from, who knows? Anyway, one afternoon, a couple of days after the activity stopped, the nephew was laying on the sofa and asked who had been messing with one of the fan blades. When we looked up, we saw what looked like 3 fingers had been dragged across it. Ignoring it, thinking it was there before we moved in and we just hadn't noticed, I cleaned the blades the next day. The fan was too high for even my 5'10" height to reach without a stepladder. We lived there for around a year. The only other thing that happened was a month or so later, as dust had accumulated once more on the fan. The 3 marks reappeared on one of those blades. The day after, for the last time, the chain was made to swing hard enough to hit the light dome. I call this the tall entity, because whatever caused the marks had to have been at least 6'5", just to be able to reach up and touch those blades. Now, I know this isn't the scariest of stories. It's not even the scariest that's happened to me. But I want to document these in order that they happen. I'm not really too religious, but I do believe in spirits and ghosts. I've always felt like being followed and watched since I was about 9 years old, and also saw shadowy figures in the corner of my eye a lot, but that has recently been attributed to mild psychosis I have, due to lack of sleep, which was due to chronic insomnia. I've also had consistent panic attacks since the same age, which has been attributed to anxiety. But despite being on medication, I only seem to be getting a little bit better. I know that medication takes a while to work, and I usually accept that. However, recently, my friend and I were playing with a dartboard I've had for a while, but never really used until she came over. She and I started to ask yes or no questions about our future, as a joke. After she left, I continued asking it because I was having fun. After a while, I started getting a weird feeling around it, as if something was actually guiding the darts to hit or miss the board. I then started to ask religious questions such as, is God real, or does hell exist? It seemed to answer yes to the questions that glorified the devil, and no to the questions that glorified God. I then asked if there was a spirit, which it replied yes. I also asked some yes or no questions that I was sure I knew the answer to, and all of them were answered correctly. This started a few days ago, and ever since I keep thinking about it and getting the urge to ask it more questions. My friend, who only asked a few questions once and not since, said she couldn't get the board out of her mind either. Today I was doing something on my computer when my lights started flickering. My computer and other plugged-in devices were unaffected. It was just my lights. Something in me said I should ask the board if it had something to do with my lights, so I did. It replied yes. As I talked to it, my lights became stable. Once I noticed, I asked the board if it wanted me to leave it alone for now, and it said yes, and my lights stayed stable. My lights have never done this before. It may all be a coincidence, but my dartboard is magnetic felt, and I use both magnetic darts that I knew had strong magnets and Velcro covered balls that stick to all the fabric I tried it on, including felt. Yet when I asked it a question that I knew the answer was no, the darts seemed to lose magnetism when they hit and the balls didn't stick. When I asked it a question I knew was yes, the darts and balls stuck. Whenever I approach it, I suddenly get an intense feeling of fear that goes away when I'm farther from it. Is it possible that this is paranormal in some way? I'm in no way an expert in this area, so if I'm overreacting, please let me know. I was sitting in my friend's bedroom in the new house his family had just built, on the site of the old barn. We had the windows open, and a soft breeze and the distant sounds of people in the park were drifting through. We were watching movies, eating snacks, having a lazy summer holiday afternoon. There was nothing eerie or scary about any of it. No scary films, no talk of anything of the sort. In between films, my friend got up to replenish the snacks while I was changing the disc. He called my name from the door, and I was turning to answer when I felt the distinct, unmistakable sensation of an ice-cold hand tightening on my neck. I dropped the DVD case as my hands instinctively flew up to my throat to pull this hand away. But of course, there was nothing there. It had completely restricted my breathing. I couldn't take a breath. My friend ran over in a panic and led me to the sofa to sit down while I gasped for air. Utterly terrified, he kept saying, just breathe, while he fumbled for his phone and started dialing 999. Then, on one of the just breathes, I was suddenly able to take a breath. It probably lasted less than a minute, but I broke down shaking and crying. It's the only unexplainable thing that's ever happened to me. I've always been enthralled by ghost stories and tales of the unexplained, but this is my only real-life experience. I have no medical conditions or allergies, nothing that has developed in the 2 decades since this happened, nothing that could explain what caused this freak accident. When I asked my friend about it years later, he said it looked like a ghost walked through me. Not that he saw a ghost, but the terror on my face and how I turned sheet white and froze. When I was around 12 years old, I was at my cousin's house for a party. We were hanging out in the backyard and woods. Part of their backyard is a wooded area, and came to this tree that I used to have a treehouse in it. All that's left of that treehouse is some steps leading to it, and a few platforms. Not safe to get up, if you can even at all. My cousin, 8 at the time, told this story about how the kids who had that treehouse had died when it collapsed. I, personally, think this was a bunch of BS, but went with it. We eventually headed back to the house, but I decided to go back into the woods alone. As I was walking into the woods, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Like I was safe there, safer than anywhere else. As I'm walking, I'm looking around, and I see a light blue and white checkered flag up in a super thin tree that I didn't notice before. As I'm looking at this and trying to figure out how it got there, I started to hear kids' voices, laughing, talking, just having fun. I didn't think too much of it at the time, as my cousins were out in the treehouse. As I'm walking closer to the old treehouse, the voices seemed louder, and I looked back up at the flag. It was moving despite there not being any wind. I shook it off as I couldn't feel the wind from down here, but up there was wind and looked back down. That's when I say, Ben. 6 children with white skin, like snow white skin. They all seem to be wearing winter gear, though dull and dirty clothing. They were walking towards me, but I didn't run. I wasn't afraid for some reason. I heard a branch snap, and that's when I ran. As I went back towards my cousin's house, I was surprised to see that they weren't outside. I found them in the living room playing video games. When I asked them when they came in, they said, "When you were walking in the woods, why?" Kids I heard weren't them. Still don't know to this day who those kids were. They weren't all the neighbours' kids, as none of them lived close by to my cousins. Were they a figment of my imagination? Whatever it was, it's one of the reasons I believe.
On December 12th of last year, me and my family moved into a new house. I was between my first and second semester of college when we moved, so I decided to take up a part-time position at a Christmas tree farm to get some extra cheese for the holiday. That pretty much meant I was never home. After a few days of actually living there, something started happening. Now, I'm a lazy bastard. I didn't unpack for like another 2 months. In fact, I still have a box or two with clothes and other shit that I just haven't touched. Anyway, there were about a dozen boxes of various things sitting inside my room. After a shift at the farm one night, I went to a buddy's house and spent the night, and didn't get home till 2 PM the next day. So I was out of the house for over 24 hours. My mum was home alone decorating the living room when she started hearing boxes being thrown in my bedroom. She assumed I was finally unpacking, so she didn't think much of it. The throwing became more and more aggressive as time went by, so she eventually busted into my room to figure out what my malfunction was. Except all of the boxes were where I left them, and the room was empty. It was weird, but got weirder when my mom remembered that the guy who lived here several years ago hit his off switch in the middle of the house on Christmas Eve. We had to do a lot of work on the home before we moved in, so it had been 2 months before we actually moved in, which is why it slipped my mother's mind that the guy died. I think his name was either Billy or Bobby. Something you name your kid that sounds good on a kid, but becomes odd when the kid turns 30. Anyway, it turns out he offed himself in my bedroom. Didn't bother me really, and I figured if he's gonna haunt me, it's cool. As long as he sticks to throwing boxes and doesn't actually mess with me. A day or two passes, and I'm in my bedroom unpacking, when I hear this loud crash and glass shattering. So I run downstairs to see what happened and make sure everyone was okay, and I see my parents just sitting on the couch. I asked what happened, and my mom just sort of gestures to the floor and said the clock fell. I looked, and sure enough, the clock we had on the wall had fallen off and broke. She said not to worry about it, and she'd clean it in a minute. At first glance, I thought that the screw I had planted on the wall to hang it had slipped, but it didn't sit right with me. So I checked it out, and the screw was still in the damn wall. I had to plant it into a stud in the wall with a daily long screw, so it didn't pry itself out. The clock is stupid heavy because it's a big decorative piece made of metal, and the place you hang it on is one of those little keyhole things on the back of it that you slide over the screw or nail to prevent it from falling. This clock definitely could not have fallen off the wall on its own, but my folks said that it had. The last encounter I personally had was definitely lackluster in comparison to the others. I was home alone and my dog was following me around to steal my sandwich. She's a 3-pound toy Yorkie poo, and despite giving everyone in the house grief for wanting this tiny dog, I like her enough to spoil her when nobody's looking. So I bent down to give her a little scrap of turkey when she started freaking the fuck out. While I'm trying to calm her down, I hear this tapping on the stove. We have a cookie jar that we recycle to use as our cooking ware container that sits between two of the eyes on the stove. I look at it and it's gently rattling, but I figured it was just something that happened in the house that I hadn't caught, like perhaps the AC kicking on and shaking it a bit or something. It just didn't bother me at first, till it started getting more and more aggressive, until I thought the jar was going to explode or some shit. But before it could, everything went silent. No rattles, no barking. I even realised I had started holding my breath. The next day was Christmas Eve, and I was expecting the house to implode, but it didn't. Nothing happened in the house after that, until early this morning, which reminded me of all that shit. Nothing big happened, but I got off my shift at about 11 and went to bed at around 1. I was asleep for maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours when my dog started flipping shit in the hallway. I get up and look out into the hallway, and I don't see shit. My younger brother wakes up and peeks out with me, and he asks what's going on. We've had some issues with trespassing before, so I got very defensive of the house and sent my brother back to his room so I could take a look. I flip on the hallway light, and there's nothing there, but my dog is still fucking panicking like her life is about to end. My parents' room is downstairs in the basement, so they don't really catch wind of this till the next day when I tell them. I start to panic, and I'm flipping on every light to every room, searching for anyone there. And all of a sudden, she stops barking. No calming down, just ceases. It reminded me of the cookie jar that I was relieved for about 2 seconds, because I knew, oh my god, nobody was really in the house. But I didn't like the idea of this old dude lingering around again now that it's getting closer to Christmas.
This all began about 19 years ago. The house that my parents first moved into was originally an old church, but was remodeled into being a house. Not much of the old church was left in the house, minus the wood flaring in the den. Now apparently, my parents had heard choir music, the sounds of boots on hardwood floors, and had even seen a shadow figure once. But as for what happened to me, my parents were trying to move me from sleeping in their bedroom to my own, but for some reason, I wouldn't do it. My only reason being, I was scared to. So my mum asked me, why are you scared of sleeping in your own room? Do you need a nightlight maybe? And apparently, I said, and I quote, because of the tall dark man in the corner over there. Then apparently I pointed over to the corner of my room where, surprise, surprise, no one was. A few other things happened in that house, but none to me personally. Fast forward a few years, and we're at our second house. Now this is where shit starts to get crazy. I feel like I should preface by saying there is a room in my house. We'll just call it the den. Since day one of being in this house, I never liked that room. I felt like I was being watched every time I was in there alone. So I did everything in my power to stay out of that room. I still do even to this day. The first incident was when I was no older than 9 or 10. It was the last day of school for me and my little brother Mark. Me, my mom and Mark were at our house. Mark realised he left his towel at school and he needed to go back and get it. My mom then turned to me and said, "Are you okay staying in the house for 10 minutes while we go back up to the school and get it?" I said I was. A few minutes after they left, I was sitting in the living room and I started to hear my mom and Mark talking from my mother's bathroom. Even though I'm completely home alone, I then hear them start to laugh. Then it stops, and everything was quiet. A few minutes later, my mom and Mark walked back into the house. However, 10-year-old me didn't even bother to mention it for some reason. A few years go by until the next incident. Now, before we keep going, I need to explain 2 things. First, I need to tell you that personally, I am very much a night owl. Staying up to 3 or 4 in the morning is nothing new to me. The second thing, in my house, there's a hallway. At one end is the front door, at the other end is the back door. Now this hallway has 4 doorways or entryways: the den, the office, the kitchen, and my parents' room. The kitchen has a bar, so you're able to see the whole living room and into my parents' room if their door is open. And then further up next to the front door is the den. The next story takes place a few months ago, around 2ish at night. I'm standing in the kitchen washing dishes, and as I'm doing so, I hear 2 things crystal fucking clear coming from the den down the hallway. I hear an old man go, "Shh," followed by a little girl giggling. I freeze in the middle of what I'm doing. I'm the only person awake right now. Now at this point, I'm panicking on the inside, however I am trying to keep my composure on the outside. I turn off the water in the sink and walk to my parents' bedroom. I then shake my dad awake and say, "Is there anyone else in this house besides you, me and Mark?" He simply said, "No, there isn't," and just fell back asleep. Annoyed, I walk up to my parents' room and I'm immediately looking down the hallway. Right towards the den, there's nothing, just like there should be. I sigh and go back to doing dishes because ghost or no ghost, I still have chores that need to be done. The next night, again, same story. I'm doing dishes. Now, something to note. I had just stood up and my shorts slipped a bit. I pulled them back up, so now the front half of my shirt is untucked, while the back half of my shirt is tucked into my shorts. As I'm washing dishes, I feel something grab the back of my shirt and pop it. Very similar to the way your mom would grab you and fix your shirt by popping and pulling it out of your pants or shorts. And surprise, surprise, that's just what the fucking ghost did. Untuck my shirt from the back of my shorts. I just simply ignore it and keep doing dishes, but again, inside, I'm extremely terrified. One other incident I forgot to mention. Next to the den, there's a room. We just simply call it the office. There are a few things in this room. 2 recliners, the family computer, a mini fridge, and most of all, the router. Now, again, it's about 1ish at night, and the Wi-Fi is being extremely slow for some reason. I groan, get up, and head into the office. Now again, the office and the den are right next to each other, so I never like going to the office alone, especially at night. But tonight I had to. So I go into the office, go to the router, press the reset button, and then sit down on one of the 2 recliners we have in there while I'm waiting for the Wi-Fi reset. Now the office door is actually a twin set of doors that both open the same way. So there's a small gap in between them. And where does that small gap look? Right into that damn den. So I'm sitting there and I can't shake this feeling that I'm being stared at. Like 2 eyes are looking at me and burrowing into my very soul. I shake my head and try to ignore the feeling. After the Wi-Fi box resets, I head back up to my room and lay down on my bed. And that's when I feel it, a red-hot burning pain on my hand. I look down at my hand and there are 3 bright red scratch marks on it. Fast forward a few months, nothing happens, just the same old feeling that you're being watched, wherever you go. Until one night, the metaphorical dam finally burst. I'm heading to bed. Now, this involves making sure the front and back door are both locked. So first thing, I check the front door. It's locked. So I walk down the hallway, reach the back door, and then lock it. I then turn around, and I see half a person walking into my den. The lower half, it cut off right at the waist. Now this person was completely see-through and sort of grey, like the ghost in the Harry Potter movies. I stand there for a few seconds, in pure disbelief at what I just saw. I then very quickly walk to my room and shut the door behind me, because everyone clearly knows that ghost can't follow you into your room. The most recent incident was last month. This time, I was not the only person awake. However, I was the only person in the house. My dad was out in the garage working, so I'm standing in the kitchen eating a sandwich. It's important to note as well, my parents' door was open in this story. So I look up from my food for a second, and I see again half a person standing in my parents' room. But this time, it's the top half. I look back down at my food. It's only after about half of a second that my brain processed what the hell I just saw. I then quickly look back up and into my parents' room, and there's nothing. No one was there. Now, here we are in the present day. Nothing new has happened as of late. However, the feeling of being watched at night grows stronger by the day. It's actually gotten to the point where I don't like to be out in the kitchen or anything at night. Also, before anyone asks, no, I'm not the only person who has experienced stuff. Both of my parents and Mark have as well.